Hey, fellow tennis nerds. I hope all is well. Welcome to another episode of the Tennis Nerd Podcast. Today, I'm inviting Eliza Wastcoat, who has a really engaging Instagram platform around tennis, probably other social media platform that I'm not aware of, but it's Eliza's World on Instagram, where she shares news, player profiles, everything that's happening in the tennis world. I really like her stuff, so check it out. How are you today, Eliza?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me and for the lovely introduction.
So you are relatively new to tennis in terms of playing, right? So that's the story.
Yes, so I played a little bit growing up. It was kind of a once a week, tennis class amongst other sports that I was playing. And I always really enjoyed it, but I was more of a team sports player growing up. I played lacrosse and an English sport called netball. So that's really what took up most of my time. And I'd play a little bit here and there in the summers, but it didn't, it took me until COVID to really get into playing tennis consistently on a regular basis and kind of really start taking some lessons and play with more seriousness. And I think it was, also a sport I chose because it's really a lifelong sport, and I wanted to find something that could take me through the many different phases of my life.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I think also I got back to tennis quite late, like in my 20s as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the love is stronger when you find something late than maybe if you get in there straight away. Is that your feeling as well? Like the passion is a bit more strong than maybe some players who play tennis the whole life?
Yes, I agree. I think with anything, when it's like your own choice to work hard at something and get into it, then your passion and your love is kind of all on your own terms. I think there are a number of players who, play growing up because their parents want them, or it helps them get a scholarship to get into school, or there's many other reasons why they might play out of kind of love and passion for the sport itself. And so, my parents never really pushed me with sports. I played at a high level in the other sports, but often when I speak to folks who played in college, for example, they have a period of time after the fact where they just don't want to play for a few years because they've lost some of that love and passion for it, and all the work that went into it can kind of take some of that away. So in a way, I'm really grateful that I came to it a little bit later in life, and it's all been on my own terms. And I think that's the special part about, coming to it a little bit later.
Yeah, it's a very good point, like that you have it on your own terms. I think some tennis parents can be quite toxic. I see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
relationships with it. There's some toxicity, and it's like kind of the kid feels it's like a bit pushed towards tennis.
Yeah,
While when you're an adult, you choose your own passion and your own vices, right? So that makes sense. Have
exactly.
you noticed, like, do you get any kind of more insight from online coaches or going to a coach? Have you found like like it's easy to get into tennis, or is tennis kind of like a bit of a guarded sport? How do you perceive it?
Yeah, it's definitely financially can be challenging to get into when, especially when you're starting from the beginning. And I do believe in, kind of having a solid foundation and a base. And it's something that's kind of hard to self-teach or just learn from YouTube videos. I think that one-to-one instruction is super important. And I often tell this story, but I got really lucky. A friend of mine's dad coaches tennis. And during COVID, I was living in a small town in Connecticut. He didn't have all that much to do. I didn't have all that much to do. And I, shot him an email. I said, would you coach me? I've been an athlete. I just want to work on a couple of things. And he was like, sure, but, you're going to have to work hard. And little did I know he'd be bringing out the cones, and we'd be out there 2-3 hours. So it kind of turned into a passion project for him too. He's a little bit older, and it was a really special relationship to craft with him. And I often say he really gave me the gift of, feeling like an athlete again and training like an athlete, even if that's just for myself and to be the best player I could be. So, yeah, I think tennis isn't always the most accessible sport when you think about, needing the space and the resources for the equipment and paying for coaching. But if you can find a good friend or a good person kind of in your circle who can spend some time with you and help you get the basics down, from there you can really kind of do anything and play with anyone. So it's maybe a high barrier to entry at first, but it quickly goes down.
I think that's a great idea, actually, to get someone, if you can find someone. It's obviously,
Mm-hmm.
tennis can sometimes feel like too competitive of a sport, like where everybody
Yeah.
wants to win, or it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot about like measuring your ego against each other. That's just my feeling, where I feel like
Mm-hmm.
maybe pickleball is a little bit easier to get into, so that's why players do that, or paddle
Mm-hmm.
in Europe.
Yeah.
But with tennis, it's good to have someone kind of help you through that kind of first phase where it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Do you watch a lot of tennis? You're doing these rundowns every, is it every day or every week? You do them quite frequently, right?
Yeah, well, so I've always watched a lot of tennis. That's been a constant for me. My dad has always been just a general big sports watcher, so he got me into watching tennis amongst other sports. But only just this year decided to kind of do commentary around it and just share my love and passion for it through social media. But yes, my goal is to try to post 5 days a week, and when there's big tournaments going on or things that are exciting in terms of the play itself, I try to commentate on it. But I also am aware I'm not a coach or a tennis expert per se, so I try to keep the rhetoric around kind of the basics that most people can understand, and share the stories around the tennis rather than kind of the technicalities itself. So like what the story is behind the person, what makes the win or loss special or unique, and what's challenging about it, as opposed to breaking down their shot selection or specific strategies, which I myself might not always fully understand.
I think that's a good idea though, because it's also, I think, one way that tennis needs to reach more people to kind of put the bridge down a little bit so people can actually access it more easily, like you said. And you're a digital strategist in your day profession. Do you think tennis needs help in terms of like marketing, in terms of the whole sport or the organizations within the sport?
Yes, a blanket answer would be yes. I think there's a lot of things from a marketing perspective that tennis could do better that would benefit the growth of the sport, the players, and the fans. Whether one looks at how tennis is actually structurally organized, through multiple different organizations, makes marketing challenging in itself. The fact that we kind of have different broadcasting rights and different channels that can, provide different commentary, and just in the US alone, trying to figure out who hosts which slam and which masters and where I can watch it is quite a barrier for most people, because it switches from Tennis Channel to Tennis TV to Eurosport to ESPN, and you're just like, where is it? I just want to watch. So I think from a marketing perspective, there's so much that they could do, and especially for me, I feel passionately about the women's side and the WTA stepping up. I think the WNBA is a really great example of women's sport that has put in a lot of work over the last few years and has seen some really great results with the WNBA finals happening just this week. It was a really good turnout. I think the Women's Soccer League in Europe is doing really well with promoting women's sport. So I think the WTA has some room to improve and an opportunity to step up to really help grow the women's game and get them on a level playing field as the men.
Yeah, because I think like women's tennis is maybe the strongest female sport there is, like at least financially and knowledge around the world. So the product itself is really strong. So it's obviously shouldn't need that much push in the right direction, but sometimes you feel it, because I also agree with that. There's so many organizations, all the slams, ATP, WTA. Why we have an ATP and WTA is confusing to say the least. You don't understand what is this setup, and if you come from other sports, you get quite confused about many things in tennis, scoring,
Yes.
How the systems with the ATP 500,000 or even, and then you go to the WTA and it has like slightly different. WTA 125 is an ATP 250 and stuff like that. So it's very, very confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing, and I think, as you say, the product is there, and in a way, at the moment, I find the women's game really interesting because there are so many different storylines and so many players who are capable of winning the bigger tournaments. And on the men's side, the last 20 years, the storyline's kind of been the same. So it's exciting to see that shifting too. But as you say, the product's there, and I think it's just about getting the brands involved. I also think with the women's game, it's like there's so much you can do from a branding perspective, whether that's merchandising, clothing, jewelry, all of those kind of markets are not as or industries aren't as invested in the sport as I think they could be. And there are so many good names in the top 20 who would be great brand ambassadors and do a really good job of promoting the sport beyond just the court, but kind of everything around it. So I'd love to see, the sport of tennis be able to capitalize on those types of partnerships and opportunities as well.
I agree. I think it's a little bit sometimes too traditional in a way. Like the structure is like really traditional, and the organizations are just doing the same thing year after year. And it's really up to the players to kind of go beyond that and do like
Yeah.
collabs or crossovers or try to get deals. I mean, now on the men's tour, we've seen like even like Gucci and bigger kind of fashion brands get into tennis, which I mean, there's huge room also on the WTA, of course, where Emma Raducanu, she has Prada, I think. So there should be lots of opportunities in tennis, but you're not
Yeah.
seeing them as much as you probably would imagine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think about things like the tunnel walk that they do for the NBA, and how the players these days all have stylists and people pay attention to what they're wearing, and they're really folded into the cultural fabric of American society. But also, they all have big social media channels, and they're able to reach people not just in the US but across the world who follow the sport and generate interest in them as an individual, but then also as a part of a team. And because tennis is an individual sport, and as you say, kind of the onus is on them to go out and get these types of brand deals, I think it would be great to kind of flip the switch and see what the actual kind of organizations could do to facilitate some of those partnerships and get some more of these brand deals done, because at the end it benefits not just the individual but the sport as a whole. And we've also seen such a rise in athleisure wear and people kind of liking that tennis style that's a little bit country club type of look. Maybe it's not quite as schlumpy as just a normal tracksuit and a hoodie. You can kind of, feel a little bit more sophisticated. And we've seen so many of these brands have a good go at entering the space or revamping their, clothing lines from Wilson to Lululemon, but they don't have the big name players on their roster, and they're not doing kind of anything beyond just the clothing itself. We'd love to see, what's the player turning up in when they get to the court, or what are they wearing in their press conference? Like, are there opportunities to kind of help them elevate that so we can generate some more impressions, not just on TV, but on social media, which at the end of the day is where most of young people's eyes are turning to. So we want to focus on generating more in that space.
Yeah, and that's a huge opportunity. I think sometimes I mean, one of the things that make you shake your head is when players turn up to the court and they wear the same outfit, and you're like,
Yes.
you can't even tell them apart. What is this? Because Nike or Wilson or whoever is the main sponsor of these two players gave them the same outfit for this match.
Yeah.
That is a Grand Slam quarterfinal or something. And you're
Yeah.
like, how can this even happen on this stage? Like, there should be some communication, but someone should put this question. And I think it also makes sense because both on the men's and the women's side, there's a lot of room for like using fashion to kind of show your personality a bit more. And it's only like, Nick Kyrgios, he wears a basketball jersey because he loves basketball, and the big headphones and stuff like that. There's very few guys that wear something different. And on the women's side, I think it's better because women's apparel is looking better, where guys are pretty boring, I would say, overall. There's not much happening in that space. But you can definitely do more. I think so.
Yeah, and personality is a part of tennis, I think, because nobody plays exactly the same way, and your style of play, your on-court look, the way you hold yourself, that's all a part of the attraction of the sport itself. And we like certain players for certain behaviors, or we remember them for their looks and style and kind of what they brought to the court. And you think of some of the best legacies, a lot of them had really great style or unique looks or tried something different, and they also had personality or a way about their game that was memorable. So from just a player perspective, I think looking at that and spending time on it and working with these brands and saying, hey, if this girl is wearing a red dress, I want to wear a black dress, or vice versa on the men's side, that they should be demanding some variety and some unique styles that help them stand out and help them gather fans, both for them individually and as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think are there any kind of players on the WTA tour then specifically that stand out to you, like that are exciting to watch, that seem to be doing the right thing with the marketing and everything around that stuff that stands out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Marta Kustuk is doing a good job of her kind of self-branding. You know, she's obviously worked really hard with Wilson over the last year or so, switching from Nike, and Wilson's really done a good job of, you know, going from a frumpy kind of fuddy-duddy old man's brand to something that feels much more young and is a much more attractive setup than it used to be. So I think she's done a good job of looking for those opportunities. But, you know, Raducanu would probably be an example of some people pointing the fingers of her doing too much. You know, I think she's with Dior, but she's, you know, at different fashion week programs, and she's got series with HSBC and Tiffany and all sorts of different partnerships. But, you know, and it's unfortunate she's injured at the moment, but I do think she's done a great job of growing her personal brand, and ultimately that helps to bring fans to the games because people know her outside of just tennis. And Kyrgios is another good example of somebody whose personality is bigger than the game himself. And so I think we're still seeing on the women's side like who that kind of big personality is going to be. But if I had to pick someone from the top 10 at the moment, it's probably Sabalenka, because she's more of the kind of louder personality type. She's funny, she's kind of charismatic, she's got some of these unique outfits now from Nike. I think New York being the first time she had that. So she's kind of strikes me as that person who wants to be more extroverted, whereas a Swiatek or a Rybakina is much more subdued, much more quiet, and kind of intentionally so maybe it doesn't suit everybody to kind of have that louder personality and seek these type of opportunities off the court, because it might be a distraction for them.
Exactly, but I think also that's also their personality, so it's kind of, it shows in their way they acting and they're talking to their box and everything about them. And I think in tennis we need contrast, right? So it's so important to have contrasting players, because that creates a much more exciting match. If you have a, like, you know, Bori McEnroe, whatever, like someone who's like more like Swiatek playing someone who's a little bit crazy or very outgoing and do, you know, outbursts and everything, much better for the crowd. I mean, that's the product we have to sell. Like, there has to be some excitement. If there are two very subdued people hitting great backhands, it's not the best product maybe as it can be, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That the personality point is spot on, and the crowd wants something to kind of bite on and react to. I think that's why people love the characters like a Kyrgios or a Medvedev, or, you know, Sabalenka with her loud grunts, or, you know, we want a little bit of controversy, something to talk about. And for me, this is just an anecdote, but it's one of the reasons why, like, I don't totally love Casper Ruud. I'm like, please smash a racket. Like, I want to see you get mad at some point. Like, I can see it in your face. You're holding it all inside. And I like players that allow me to kind of ride that wave with them. As a spectator, that's much more fun than kind of being like, oh, I got to be just as buttoned up as this guy. And I'm feeling more emotional than they are, apparently.
I think, like, some players looked at what Fed did and they think that's the way forward, even if it might not suit their personality. That's just a wild guess, but I feel like you know, he was really feisty and crazy as a you know, junior player, and then he calmed down and he won so many slams. But you need to kind of play your personality. You see that Novak, he seems to like when there's a lot of animosity, and he seems to act well with that. A person like Swiatek, she likes the least issues as possible because she has fantastic tennis. So if it's just tennis for her, she can just play her game and be in her zone. So if someone's gonna beat her, they might want to, you know, create a little bit of chaos, a little bit of drama, you know. And I think for watching it, it's much better to see that. You know, I much prefer there's some aggro, some kind of stuff happening. That's a storyline that's not only 1540 and 5-3.
Yeah, well said. I think that's exactly right. It's much more attractive as a fan when you have something to grab onto beyond just pure tennis.
Maybe the organization should encourage it a bit. Maybe it's in the rule book. I'm just, you know, thinking out loud, but it's like, you know, you get punished, you get fines, you get everything if you just look at someone throwing the racket, you get a fine. Like, they go to quite extreme ways and really not encouraging any kind of emotional outburst. I mean, some players go crazy because tennis is a sport that drives you crazy, and you can see some bad stuff, but that's also a part of being a professional athlete, right? You have a lot of on the line there, and emotions are running high, and it can lead to mental issues off the court and stuff. But that's a part of it, the whole ride.
Yes, I do think the etiquette of tennis sometimes can get in the way, both from a fan perspective and a player perspective. So, like, one personal anecdote is I like to play a tennis tournament in the summer as a part of a, local tennis club. And as much as I love the club, they think very highly of themselves. Like, we dress in all white. It's, this whole tradition. And when I played the tournament last year for the first time, I was like, oh my goodness, these people come and watch, and like, I better not say come on or, show any type of like anger or rage, because they'll probably tell me off for it. And then I ended up losing in the final. And I was so frustrated because I was like, you know what? I just really wasn't myself. And when I play, I'm, the swear words are coming out. Like, I got to yell at myself to keep concentrating, stay awake, whatever it is. So this year I did my thing. I still lost, but I played my game and I was much happier with the result. And that meant, there was come-ons after different points. If I hit winners, I wanted the crowd involved. I wanted a little bit of something. I asked my friends to come and watch, and of course, a couple of weeks after the final, I got a phone call that was like, so, we're not too sure about some of the people in the crowd and, some of the etiquette. And I was just like, are you joking me? Like, what is this? I want to compete. I want to have fun. Like, you wouldn't have this at a 5-on-5 basketball game. Like, we don't have this type of etiquette in any other sport. And of course, I'm going to say good shot if it's a good shot, but I don't think there should ever be a situation where a player can't, have their, speak and be able to say, come on, and, have volume to themselves. I think some of the criticism that, like, Ben Shelton gets, for example, is ridiculous. I mean, he's such a good sportsman. He, says good shot. He applauds the opponent when they deserve it. But if he wants to let out a big roar after he's had a good hold in a service game and that helps him play and deal with the pressure, he should do it, and he certainly shouldn't get, reprimanded for it or a bad reputation, for being unsportsmanlike. I think sometimes the etiquette goes way too far in tennis, and it's not very natural. You really don't have that in any other sport.
No, it seems like it's a little bit almost made up. Like I understand, like, for example, Nick, that he's curious, that was frustrated with this for so long, because if you're watching other sports, you're seeing all the emotions where, on their sleeves, and then you're playing in Wimbledon and you cannot do anything, and it's like, it must be so tough to contain that emotion. And some players are great at doing it and it works for them, but some players like you maybe want to be a bit more like Vamos and look at their box and be, more engaged, and that's a part of it. That's great. Like, I think it brings also more energy to the whole match, because then the opponent maybe wants to win even more, so it's like there's a bit of more feisty energy than it's just like a lukewarm, oh, well done to you, yeah. And it's like, yeah, that's not really, that's exciting to watch this.
No, exactly. And I think if you're somebody who's played sports other than tennis, that concept makes a lot more sense to you, because it's not a natural experience. And I think, as you say, like, if you have one player that's the more contained type, they need to also learn to not be bothered by what's going on at the other side of the net. You got to focus on your own game and do what you got to do within a respectful limit to win the match or play your best tennis. And at the end of the day, I think at any level, you just want to have the best match that you possibly can from both sides, and both players can play their best tennis, and that decides the outcome. And as long as that's within, a good limit and a decent boundary, then I don't think there should be so much respectful play. I don't think it benefits anybody, to be honest.
No, but maybe it's like, it feels like an old-fashioned old man elitist kind of thing,
Yes.
And if you look at like YouTube videos and you check, like, there's even channels devoted to tennis drama, or the biggest. I watched a video today, just pure coincidence, that Hugo Gaston was one of the biggest clowns in tennis, and because he's like, he has some cheating allegations, he's been getting a lot of fines, he seems to be acting a bit not so great, and people want to watch that. I mean, even you might dislike the guy and say, okay, this is not fair, whatever, but at least it's fun to watch, it's entertainment. So
it is, and it's the same principle as like boxing, for example, as an individual sport. Like, the bigger the build up is before the match, like the more drama and animosity between the fighters, the more people want to watch. And I think that's the other thing that sometimes people forget with tennis is, yes, it's a sport, but all sports are a show at the end of the day, and we want to sell out as many stadiums as possible. You want to have as many people watching on TV as possible. And the way to do that is to, A, have a personality that's appealing to, to your audience, and B, stir the pot a little bit. Let's have a little bit of drama. That again, like, there's a reason why people who don't watch tennis watch Nick Kyrgios, because he always has some, shit to say, and it's gonna, do the rounds on social, and whether you like him or not, it grows the sport. And in a world where there are so many different sports that are growing and we're competing for attention, we should applaud that and not reprimand it at all times, I think.
Yeah, I think people they connect who people are on the court with who they are off the court, which I think is not really true. Like, I mean, you can think what you will about Novak on the court, but when you meet him off the court, he's like the nicest guy ever. And same with Nick, it's like he might be hating himself and talking out loud and disturbing people in a way on the court, but that doesn't mean he's like that off the court. But people connect them too much, and they read maybe too much into it. But if you play tennis on any level, you know that tennis is a mind game. Like, you go crazy when you play tennis. Tennis can really like make you want to throw your racket into the fence every other point. So it's like you have to respect that emotion as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not just tennis, it's every sport. Like, the competitor is different from the person. And, you just can't expect somebody to be like, who they are when you're having a one-on-one conversation when they're competing in front of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Like, that's a pressure that most of us can't understand. With that much money on the line, with your reputation on the line as an individual, the way that you handle that or manage that, like, we're so judgmental of it, when the majority of us, would probably be handling it much worse than they are in that type of situation. So I think sometimes it's, taking things with a little bit of a pinch of salt when you're trying to react to how somebody's behaving on court, and just put yourself, or think about what it would be like to be in their situation, and it might put things into context as to why they're acting a certain way.
Yeah, you can just go to any club level tournament. I think you're going to see some crazy behavior. Like, if I go to an open here, I played one a few weeks ago, like, I saw some shit on the court next to me. I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? Like, they're screaming at each other. It's like not nice words. I'm like, whoa, this is more exciting than my match.
You wanted to stop and watch. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, and this is how I am with my friends when we're playing, it's all good. Like, say whatever you want, do whatever you want. You can, if you want, at the end of the day, you get bragging rights for the rest of the week. But as long as we can still go and get a drink afterwards, or, have a chat afterwards, I think it's all, within good spirit of competing and just wanting to play well. And of course, there's going to be some people who are like, no, like, you did this and you called my shot out and we'll never be friends. And you're just like, okay, well, sorry. Like, at the end of the day, everybody wants to win, and it's a good feeling to pursue. And at a non-professional level, I think some people just need to just appreciate that we both want to play tennis and love tennis and relax a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that having a drink afterwards, whether it's coffee or a beer or whatever, but it's like, you can have a heated match and still like be normal afterwards. It's not that difficult. Like, you just need to contain yourself a little bit, like, from that feeling of losing over someone calling a ball in or out, whether you thought it was right or not.
Yeah, compartmentalize it. I think, again, like, that's what some of the best players in the world do. They're able to, have their on-court life and separate that off-court life. And I think the more that one can recognize that at the end of the day, it's just a game, and a lot of us as adults lose that love of playing games, whether it's sport or board games or anything where you just kind of have a little bit of mild competition. And I think it's good. It's healthy, and competing at any level is good for the mind and the body. So just acknowledging that and being able to keep the two a little bit separate it's easy enough, in my opinion.
Staying on the topic of like marketing tennis, what do you think of Breakpoint? Did you watch it on Netflix? Do you think it was good, or what would you improve?
Yeah, good question. So I've watched Breakpoint. I also watched all of Drive to Survive, who were the producers of Breakpoint, and also Full Swing, which was the golf version of Breakpoint. And if I rank the three, Breakpoint is at the bottom of the three, because I think if you're a tennis fan and you watched that season, you knew a lot of what was coming in Breakpoint. Like, there wasn't anything that I watched there where I was like, oh, that's an interview I haven't seen or a storyline I didn't really know. Whereas, you know, I watch F1 week in, week out. I watch the interviews, and I always learn something new or figure out some sort of nuance when I watch Drive to Survive the season after. And there was just, especially in part one, lacking a little bit of that, like, you know, true digging deeper personality. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the rivalries or like relationships of, you know, this team took this physio from this player and now, you know, there's animosity there, or there's a little bit of you know, that underneath part that's not just the outcome of the match. I think they got a little bit of that in part two with Sabalenka in particular. I think they did a good job of kind of showing, some of that off-court reaction to everything going on in Russia and Ukraine, and kind of how that was impacting her and what other players were saying about her, and, you know, the way she's been treated in the locker room. Whether we, you know, agree with it or not, I felt like that got a little bit underneath the surface and helped us understand who she was. So if they come back with a season two, I'd like to see a little bit more in that direction, because if you're a tennis fan already, it just wasn't giving me anything new.
I think the same. I mean, I think the issue is a little bit like, okay, for the tennis fan, it's not deep enough. But I think that also goes for many sports fans in general, because if you just go back and look at the sports results, you don't want a summary of the season. You want, like what you said, what are the relationships? How is this guy or girl really off the court? You want to get more understanding off the court. And I think they didn't really go deep enough. They just show like, oh, here's Tomjanovic and Matteo Berrettini. Most people who watched it, they knew like, oh, they broke up like 6 months ago. What is this? Like, it's not, that's not, unless you're going to lead to like why they broke up or something, that it's not going to be deep enough for you to kind of get invested in this situation. So I think also with tennis, like, you're a whole season after, it felt more like that than it does in Drive to Survive, for example. Like, it felt like you're getting the same product, it's just 1 year later and nicely packaged by Netflix. You know, it's nicely packaged, but you want more juice on the bone, you know?
Yeah, well said. I think that's exactly it. You know, we don't want the summary of the season. I think that's exactly right. So, you know, hopefully they'll get a season two and they continue to be able to film. I know that Swiatek wasn't very happy with her cut, so it sounds like she won't be participating in another round, which was interesting, but I'm also not super surprised based on her personality. I feel like she's just so private. She wouldn't have wanted to get into anything much deeper anyway. And I know her coach got a lot of criticism online, which didn't sit well with her. So, a shame to lose her, but hopefully they'll add a couple other interesting names in. And I think that's the other thing is, like, it doesn't always have to be the big guys. Like with Drive to Survive, they don't always have Max Verstappen, or not every episode is Lewis Hamilton. It's like the drivers at the back of the grid that's the most interesting, because they're the ones that crash into each other every week and, you know, probably have the most dramas. You know, it's the tightest between them and getting points, and their team, you know, financially suffering or not. And I think that's kind of the same for tennis. You know, players that are hanging around that top 50 and over zone, like, those are the guys that probably have a lot of drama and kind of, you know, things going on, or storylines that normal tennis fans might not know, where they have the most on the line in terms of, hey, you know, if I win this first round, that's 80 grand more than I made last year. That's huge for somebody, you know, like a Liam Brody or someone like that who got to a second, third round at Wimbledon at a home tournament. Like, I think those are the types of players they should also try to tap into a little bit more, because not just from like a Breakpoint perspective, again, also from a marketing or branding perspective, like, it doesn't always have to be your top 50 players. Like, some of these girls and guys outside of the top 50 have good social media following. They're funny, they're relatable, their journey seems a little bit more realistic than some of the top players, and their relationships with brands can also be really interesting and maybe a little bit more personal. It's hard to connect with someone who's number one in the world and is winning slams. It's much more relatable to speak to someone who's just trying to qualify or just trying to win a round or two here or there at a tournament, because most tennis players can relate to that type of feeling. So I think it's not just about going for the best of the best, but recognizing that there's really awesome storylines at multiple levels of the sport.
Yeah, I think I've said that before. I think like that if you go down to challenger level, or players that are struggling on both women's and men's side, it's not necessarily struggling, but they're, like you said, like a great point. Like if you look at tennis, there's a level which is hard to relate to, and they live also, they can afford to be private. They don't need any publicity. Like guys like they don't need to be in the spotlight because they're already in the spotlight as a pro athlete, right? But if you have a player who's 200 in the world, this could be a great bonus for their career. They can grow their social media, and if they're engaging enough person, doesn't matter if they reach top 100 or whatever happens, it's exciting for people to follow. It's like, wow, I can follow this player. Doesn't matter. Like, I mean, if you look at Felix Mischke, who was on my pod as well, like he's 1,000 trying to become 1,000 in the world. People follow his journey like crazy. It's that easy. You don't need to go for the stars, right?
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's the people at that kind of cusp of trying to go pro, who are trying to make ends meet, or that story about one of the guys who played in a Florida tournament this year, who's like a investment banker, real estate guy. I forget his name, but I mean, awesome story. It generated so much news and excitement of like, oh my god, like this guy did this, like that's so amazing that he still has a love for it, that he still can like get out there and compete. So I think it's it's trying to encourage folks that yes, like tennis might not be the biggest, most dominant sport, but that doesn't mean that when you make a show about it, you have to have only the top 10 players or the very best players who are a part of it, because I don't necessarily think that they're the most interesting ones per se. It's fun to see kind of the unfinished product and the person that's struggling to make it work, but has got a love for the game that's so deep and passionate that they're still going. Doesn't matter if they're 1,000 in the world, 200 or top 50, like they're still out there every day competing and working their hardest to be the best they can be, which is admirable.
Yeah, and it's more fascinating to see the depth, because tennis has this stark like decline. Like if you start at the top, you're living a relatively glamorous life. You can have very nice fashion brand sponsors. As soon as you drop below like 100 or 200, it's not glamorous anymore. It's like you have to travel to Tunisia to play 3 futures in a row. Hopefully you can get some points so you don't have to qualify in the next tournament. You're living in some pretty shitty hotel. Like that stuff is more engaging to watch, in my opinion. Obviously not so nice for the player, but then you can make a lot more drama out of it. Like it can be much more engaging as a storyline. And I think sometimes in tennis we forget the stories, and that's the same kind of going back to what we talked about before. Like Nick Kyrgios is a story in himself, Sabalenka is a story in herself. So you want to get to the core of the story, but sometimes it's just like very you surface, go on the surface of 10 different players. And like you said with Casper, I'm not, he seems like a super nice guy.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna go and tune in on his matches. Like my friend is one of his friends, and they're both Norwegian, so obviously he's gonna be like, let's watch Casper. I'm like, you can watch something else. It's not the most exciting, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think you're right. Like it's the storylines a little bit, at the bottom of the of the pyramid that are most exciting. And I also think from like a commentary perspective, not just at the slams, but some of the bigger tournaments, the 500s, the thousands, like it's the same crew of commentators week in, week out most of the time, and it's always the same stories. They're always commenting on very similar things of like, oh, their ball toss is wrong, or their footwork on this shot is just bad, and that's why they keep missing. It's like, yes, you need a little bit of that kind of like analytical breakdown, but again, I think for most of the kind of wider tennis audience, like they want to know about who this person is, where they've come from, their background, like their struggle, who they roomed with for the last 3 years, or, who their closest friends are on the tour, and kind of what their personality's like on and off the court. And I don't think they, at the moment, do a very good job of telling that story and help us as fans get to know the players. And I think, like we said at the beginning, that's just, well, it hurts the sport and the players because it doesn't allow us to make a personal connection. And so that means you don't remember their name. And when you go to a tournament, you might not go and see that person. Whereas if you actually heard their story and felt an emotional connection to them, you might be following them and looking to watch them when you're at a tennis tournament. So I think there's room for improvement on that front as well.
For sure. You're a very good analyst of the game. I hear that even more today than just watching the rundown. But would you ever want to go into kind of broadcasting or commentating or being a part of tennis productions somewhere outside the Instagram or the social media world?
Yes, I would love to. It's definitely a dream of mine. I'm hoping to use my social media to make that work for myself. I obviously don't come from a broadcasting or traditional media background, so it would be a different route, but I would love to share my passion on a larger stage and again try to tell those more unique stories, more interesting stories, and make the sport appealing to a younger generation. So hopefully that opportunity will come around sometime, but if not, we'll keep going on Instagram. Hopefully at some point I'll do a YouTube channel so I can go in a little bit more depth on thoughts and feelings around tennis. But I've realized that there's such an engaged community of folks around tennis online, even if it's niche and small. Like, people want to talk about it, and so I think that's kind of what's taken me a bit by surprise and also excites me, is that there are still a lot of people watching tennis and interested in tennis, and folks that are kind of looking for ways to make it easier to follow along. And that's kind of the market I'm trying to tap, and we'll see where it goes. But commentary would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it would be great to see commentators from different backgrounds. You mentioned it before, it's always the same, and I did like commentary once in Sweden for some TV when I lived there briefly, and it was fun. Like, it's a lot of fun, and depending on the team and the energy and the you have in the room, it can be really like a great thing. But if you always bring the same people, it gets sort of stale, like, and you always have the same perspective. Exactly what you said. Like, we don't always need to know the ball toss. We want to know, like, he broke up with his coach because they couldn't get along about this. That's a drama. That's personal connection. Technical stuff added, and also something that frustrates me is, like, often when you watch commentary, it's I know they have to be very fast with their take, but it's often just reciting what happened. So it's more like, she hit a backhand in the net, and you're like, well, yeah, everyone, even the new viewers can see that. Get more depth, or maybe be quiet and wait for the next moment, and then you add some kind of really interesting fact about what you're seeing. So I think that would be cool. I would like more angles of commentary. That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you.
When it comes to doing social media, I mean, you're doing 5 a week. Time wise, I know it's tough, but it's obvious that there's a lot of online coaches. So the coaching arena of Instagram is kind of, I would say, saturated. I would, there's a billion of them. I had many of them on my podcast, so I have a good feeling for that. And it's always interesting to talk coaching and stuff, but you need alternate perspectives. You need a little bit of a, how can we make tennis big picture? We're not going to make tennis big picture by saying how to hit a forehand. It's not going to do it. It's going to help some players, but there's already lots of that. Have you watched UTS? What do you think about the Ultimate Tennis Showdown? Is that a route to go to make it more exciting, or is that just circus?
Yes, I've watched UTS, and I think the more and more I think about it, and the more I learn about players' feelings at all levels or around specific issues, this year about the balls or scheduling challenges and things like that, the more I think that there's room and opportunity for an alternative type of approach to tennis, and something that forces us to kind of rethink how tennis is structured as a whole. Because from a high level, I think the season is so long, the travel is so insane. And for players who aren't from Europe or the US, most of them aren't going home for 5-6 months a year. It's just, I don't feel like the way it's set up produces the best end product possible. And so I encourage alternative, ways to approach tennis that might as a whole kind of lead to a rethink of how tennis is organized and structured. I'm not sure that I totally like would love to see UTS as like a pro league or something as a, you know, a viable alternative to how tennis is currently run, but as a means of putting on a different show and trying to, you know, think about different ways to approach the game, I think it's fantastic, and I encourage that. And so it's great to see, you know, an opportunity to reach new fans, for fans to get to know players a little bit differently outside of a, you know, such a competitive environment, to watch them play, because I think that's something that also people forget is like the way we play in practice under pressure is so different than without pressure. You know, a player might try different things or unique shots, or, you know, kind of have different types of rallies when there isn't, you know, something so big on the line as an end result. So I think that's another fun aspect of UTS. I also think the commentary on UTS is fun. The way they kind of like speak to players, you know, mid-match, or kind of the coaching that they allow from player to player. I like the way that they've rethought it and the big names that they've got a part of it. And I think it just facilitates the conversation that needs to be had around how tennis should rebrand and remodel itself for the future generation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Like it's like kind of, it facilitates. I mean, I think maybe it's a bit extreme, but that's a way of opening doors to other people's minds and saying, okay, you're doing it like this. I mean, if we look at like environmental friendly aspects, it's just like people are flying all over the place all the time. They're not sleeping well. It's a struggle to get transportation. I mean, if you watch like Kasatkina and her wife's or girlfriend's channel, which is great, you see like the frustrations of actually, because they really go behind the scenes, which is something I really think is great. So, but tennis could be structured maybe, you know, in a league way, or, you know, having less travel, having the players more in one spot longer, possibly. They really need to challenge, I think, the system, and I think that that's a good thing that it does. And you mentioned the coaching aspect. I think I like the idea of having like a coach, even if it's just like a timeout, and if they're like mic'd up in some way, or there's some kind of translation, because that conversation is fascinating. You see it in other sports. Like, what is this guy gonna tell him now after this really shitty first set? You know, well, how is he gonna change it? And that gives the spectators something to kind of grab onto, and like, oh yeah, he talked about hitting more, you know, serves on his backhand, and then they can watch for that, so they learn a bit more, and the whole watching experience gets more engaging.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think there's a little easy changes to make with, you know, big outcomes that can be super interesting and generate a lot of conversation around the game. Because I think that's the other thing with tennis is the people who, you know, are running the big media and broadcast operations have been so focused on TV for the longest time. And we know that the future of TV and sports is streaming. And it's how we consume sports via social media, and the conversations that the fans are having on social are just as important to monitor and listen to as the stats and numbers that we see on the TV. And so I think tennis is a little bit behind in that way, in that they haven't, you know, necessarily done the best job of finding those little clips and nuggets. And to me, one good example of it is Tennis Channel versus Tennis TV. So Tennis Channel has been around for much longer, you know, has been on traditional cable network TV. They have 500,000 followers on Instagram. Tennis TV is relatively new to the game, but what they do well is really great clips from the matches itself, because not everybody has the time to watch every single match. They find the funny little, you know, memeable parts of it, the little nuances. Comes to mind recently is Medvedev taking his toy out of Sinner's trophy in China. And they have nearly 3 million followers on Instagram. And it just shows that when you pay attention to social and you think about content from a social first perspective, it's huge, not only for kind of them generating attention around their product, but also huge for the fans and huge for growing the sport and reaching a new audience. And I think that's something that like a tennis channel underestimates. And so finding little things like, you know, if you had a clip of what this coach said to the player, I'm sure there would be many instances where a clip like that could go viral. And again, who does that benefit? It's like the sport as a whole. Like, we want more and more people to have conversations and that sort of social listening around tennis. And so what are little ways, little things that we can insert into the game that make, social first content or that type of snippets relatable without having to kind of watch the full match or memorable. So I think that's a good suggestion, and there's other pieces from UTS that one could take from that too, that would make, sharing things on social media and kind of attracting an audience outside of that traditional TV broadcasting realm much more achievable.
Yeah, and isn't it weird that like tennis TV, that's just ATP? So we get to that problem again. Like, where do I get like WTA clips? Then I have to subscribe to their service, which is maybe different or have different jurisdictions. I don't know. So it's like you need to be subscribed to so many services to just be a tennis fan, right? Which is feels very strange because you want to watch both WTA, ATP. Maybe you want to watch Challenger tennis. I don't know. So it's like it's complicated to be a tennis fan.
It is definitely complicated, and I think. Originally the WTA was part of the tennis TV package, and then they sort of had some sort of falling out and their contract didn't go through, and I think the WTA is missing out big time on not being on tennis TV, because really I don't know where to watch them other than Tennis Channel or with the slams. It's really hard to watch WTA, and I think that's a huge fuck up on their part, to be honest with you, because it's hurting the women's game. And I think there would be, when you serve women's tennis, people watch it. It's like when you go to a tennis tournament, you're not paying for, until the later ends of a tournament, you're not paying for a men's ticket or a women's ticket. Like, you're watching both, when you go and watch a tournament. And I think that there is truth in saying that there's just as much interest in women's tennis as there is men's tennis. When you expose them and you give people the opportunity to watch, you generate those storylines. I think best of 3-set tennis is just as interesting at times as best of 5. It's also much shorter, much more attainable for a lot of folks. And so, it's a big shame the WTA isn't a part of tennis TV. And if I were at any level of their leadership in their organization, I would be pushing them to figure that one out, because it's a big loss.
Yeah, there's been some pushes like publicly, but it seems to end with just like a statement going somewhere, and then it's like nothing really happens. You don't see any real practical resolution or an effort in actually joining these two organizations. I understand it's a huge thing, because they got in that situation and now they have to get out of it, but it's still a bit sad. And when it comes to your own tennis, like you are a competitive person. Do you have any goals on your horizon of like playing more tournaments, or you must like to play tournaments then if you're into the competition part?
Yeah, I do play a couple little tournaments here and there throughout the year. I'm still hanging on to that team sports background, so I am a much more competent doubles player than I am singles player. I do play a UTS league, doubles league in LA. So that's good fun. It's a nice way to meet people and, play some good tennis. And doubles is usually less stressful for me and much less complicated from a strategy perspective, because I feel like my choices are much easier to make. I'm like, I want to hit cross court until I see a down the line opportunity, or I'm going to come to the net and just volley as well as I can. Whereas with singles, it's like, oh, do I go back cross court? Do I hit down the line? Do I bring him in? Do I go for moonballing? Like, what do I do? And I think that's what I've realized is the hardest about tennis. Like, once you've got the fundamentals and the strokes down, it's like one thing being able to hit a tennis ball and a completely different thing being able to figure out a match. So I think for me, the goal is to maybe get over my own fear a little bit of playing singles and just be okay with losing a few times until I figure out how to be a consistent winner. Because especially when, you're at a like 3-5, 4-0 level, people are very consistent, and it's hard to hit past them. So you got to be patient and have that kind of self-confidence and belief. So it's something I'm working on, and I want to push myself to play a couple more singles leagues over the next year, just so I can get over my hump and fear of losing.
Do you think that the doubles is a kind of underserved product in tennis? Like it could reach more viewers if you pushed it a bit more?
100%. Yes. I think doubles is so much fun to watch, especially high level doubles. I mean, like, I don't know how their reaction times are so fast, that their strategy is fantastic to watch. I think it's totally underrated, at the tour level. And I also think it would be fun to see, some element or incorporation of or requirement of singles players needing to play a certain amount of doubles each year. Because not only do I think it's like good for their game, I think it's again, like bringing different personalities together, like seeing how they play in doubles versus singles, putting them up against traditional doubles teams. Like I think what Kokkinakis and Kyrgios did was so fun to watch because it's, you know, it disturbs what we think of as like the doubles specialists. And I like Taylor Townsend and Leila Fernandez playing together. Like they're fun and interesting, or Taylor Townsend and Ben Shelton playing together. I love that Coco plays doubles and Pegula plays doubles together. So I think it would be awesome to see more of that, and to also encourage more singles players to be a part of the, you know, doubles format and compete alongside. But again, like if you have people who are teamed up, like, and then they play each other in a match, like what's that gonna be like, or versus each other with different rivalries, I think it's a lot of fun. So I would love to see more investment into doubles, and again the storylines there, and because it's still a lot of fun to watch. I'm not sure why people would think it's so subpar to singles. I think again that goes into like the etiquette conversation, and you know, people thinking so highly of themselves or their singles game when doubles is, those players are just as good.
Yeah, and I think players who struggle with the mental part of tennis, because competing is mentally draining for many players, especially. I think playing doubles gives you that extra teammate who you can encourage each other. You have someone to rely on, and you play for someone else. So you can't really go into tanking mode or you know, get too down on yourself because you have to think of your partner. So I think there's good learnings from doubles as well.
Yeah, and it's maybe a little bit more fun depending on, you know, who you are and how you approach it, and hopefully you have a good relationship with your doubles partner and they help curb your highs and lows, and you do the same for them. And there's something about that camaraderie of having somebody on the court with you and figuring out problems together. And you know, like yesterday I was playing a doubles match. We won the first set easily, then we lost the second, and we go into the third set, you know, 10-point tiebreak. I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do? Like, what did we learn from second set, first set? Like, how are we going to go about this differently? Like, you know, it's just kind of that conversation, and it just makes things, especially for me, at a lower level, a little bit less scary, a little easier to navigate. And I like the responsibility of taking care of my partner. I've heard the opposite, though. Some people are like, oh, I feel more nervous in doubles because I don't want to let my partner down, which I understand as well. And I think that's just where, you know, people have different personalities for team and individual sports.
I'm in the camp of being like, I'm going to let my opponent or my partner down, but I'm learning to deal with that. You know, you have to be like, you have to get into it, and you have to learn the strategy. So if you play, like I played with some Davis Cup players in Malta and stuff, you start understanding so much strategy that you don't think about before. And that's actually something that's quite exciting to learn, and something that you could sell as a product as well, I think, because the strategy is completely different. You have to think of tennis in a completely different way than if you just play singles, which is just for like trying to hit the ball where the opponent is not.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different game, and it got a different approach. And I think that, again, like all different kind of forms and variation of how tennis takes place is an opportunity to reach new audiences and grow things depending on how we package them. And tennis, like you said at the beginning, has not changed for a long time. It's been kind of stale in terms of implementing new rules, regulations. Like, it feels like the only things that have really been done is like Hawkeye and the coaching change. But like in terms of formats, like everything's been the same for as long as I can remember watching tennis. So I think it's understanding that change can be a good thing, and revamping and rethinking how we market the sport, package the sport, how we reach new audiences is a really pressing question and challenge for tennis as a whole, because we run the risk of losing the focus and attention of, you know, a younger generation that does things differently and consumes media differently, has different levels of attention span, and are interested in different aspects of sport, not just the sport itself. They want to know, again, those stories. So I think finding more ways to play tennis in different formats and market that is always an opportunity that one should pursue from an organization perspective.
Yeah, 100%. your tennis background, like, so your father is a huge sports fan. You've been playing
Hmm.
netball and all that kind of sports. So is your whole family like that? Do you have brothers or sisters that are also into sports?
No, actually, I have an older sister, and she probably couldn't be more the opposite from me when it comes to sports. But in a way, that was a good thing growing up because we never competed with each other on anything. Like she was the academic musical one, and I was the sporty, not so good at school type that just wanted to play games and be outside. And my mum is pretty funny. She she would probably tell you she hates sports in general and she doesn't like games. So I definitely don't get it from her. I get it from my dad. I mean, he always talked about like how he used to write for a sports newspaper growing up, and how on the low he did really wish he was a commentator or did something in the sports world, but in the end has been able to keep sports as a hobby for himself. And I think he probably has BBC Sport open all day and is consuming every article posted there. So it's definitely a gene I get from him. And yeah, now we're sending each other messages back and forth on Twitter. I got him on Twitter to send him messages. So yeah, he's the influence.
Yeah, and you can compare perspectives of tennis and how it's going, or like that's pretty good, I think. And not with
Yeah.
your mother, because she might get angry then. But
Yes.
is she also a musician, your mother, or like your sister, or no?
No, not a musician. She was a journalist. She's also a yoga teacher. So it's not like she's unathletic. She, takes good care of herself. She was a horse rider and a swimmer growing up. So she's sporty. She just hates team sports, hates anything with a ball. And I'm like, I hate anything that doesn't have a ball, so I do not want to do yoga with you. As much as I probably should. It's just not fun to me. But no, she's definitely athletic. It's just not her cup of tea. She's was a journalist as well, as I mentioned. She's really into politics and is super intellectual. Not belittling myself, but I don't have as much of that gene as she does.
It's nice to be different as well. I think that's quite
Yeah.
important. But yeah, sometimes people who are really into yoga can be not so excited about sports because it's like placed on a different spectrum of what you like, kind of emotion. Like the sports is combative and yoga is kind of peaceful and tranquility, and so it kind of plays like different notes. You can like both, and yoga is good for tennis, stretching, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. It can be quite a like polarizing thing for sports lovers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know many people who are big like ball sports and tennis people who love yoga. I know a few, but not many. Most of us are like, oh, we got to stretch again. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, it's just nothing but slow, boring, and painful. But as you say, it's good for you. So we do it a little bit here and there.
That's good. So you moved from, I mean, you grew up in the UK and now you're in LA. How did you end up
Yeah.
in LA? Studies or?
Well, so I actually moved to the States in 2016. I was in school in Pennsylvania on the East Coast before I moved out to LA, and the East Coast winters just did not do it for me. I don't ever want to live through another one of those. And I don't know, growing up in London, the big calling was I would always be like, oh, I want to go to Stanford in California. That would be amazing. And I didn't have the grades to get into Stanford, but that was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to get out to the West Coast. And so I originally moved out here for a job. I worked for a creative agency. I was doing, even though I work remotely, I was still doing like on-set production for a couple of different, brands, which was a lot of fun. And I ended up leaving that job just because creative agency life can be all-consuming and leave very little free time, and I felt like I was losing a lot of my own personal creativity. I think one of the things I learned in school about myself was that I actually am creative even if I'm not artistic, because I think something that is often taught to young kids growing up is like, you're only creative if you can draw or you can paint or you can make things. I didn't realize that you could be creative in your strategy or how you think about marketing a product, or in entrepreneurship there's creativity. And so I found that in college about myself, that I am actually a creative thinker and that I like to solve problems. I just may not do that in the traditional sense of the word. So I think that helped me unlock this kind of personal love for learning, new things, whether that was teaching myself how to use like Premiere Pro and Photoshop to designing t-shirts. And yeah, when I was working as, 90, 100-hour weeks, I just felt like I had no time for my personal projects and kind of finding my own passions. And it took me about 6-7 months after I quit that job to like feel normal again and feel like I had enough free time to, I was kind of over the tiredness and exhaustion of that life. And earlier this year in January was when I really kind of was like, oh, I have time now to work on my own things and to have free time just to think and be creative. I think that's something that I've also come to appreciate, is that you don't need to pack your day full every single day. I think that's something I've learned about American culture, is Americans love to be busy and love to always be having, oh, I'm being super productive, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I'm like, being bored sometimes is a good thing. Like, not having anything to do this afternoon allows me to sit down and like, hey, like, what do I want to make? Or like, what do I like? And what am I interested in? And, get off your phone a little bit and just sit and think. And so that's what gave me the headspace to start doing the social stuff this year in January. And I'm really grateful for it. So the work-life balance I have now, I work at a tech agency. It's much more sustainable. They treat me much better. And luckily, kind of my schedule is I work East Coast hours, so I start very early in the morning, but I'm done around 2-3 p.m. So that gives me a lot of time back to work on my own things and play tennis and, keep myself entertained.
No, I mean, that's very wise thinking, especially for a young age. I mean, because one of the books I'm reading right now is Joanna Hari about like our lack of focus today, and also like you mentioned American work culture. I used to like live in the US, work as a journalist, and you work like I used to work. I was very young, I used to work 9 to 9. It's like completely crazy days. I was at the White House for half a year. Just like it was insane and fun, but also like you have no time at all to do anything of a hobby. And if you ask for 1 day leave, they like look at you and laugh. You're like, oh, you're a young person. You should be a slave. It's like that.
Yep.
So. And also having worked in the creative, as a creative director, I know exactly what you mean about this, like LA creative agency. And if you're on sets and stuff and you're doing production for commercials or whatever, it's a heavy day. You don't have any time to breathe, pretty much, right?
No, hardly even any time to sleep or eat, like do anything, to be honest with you. Yeah, and I think it's something that maybe the Europeans get a little bit, better over the Americans. Like sometimes less is more. You can be more productive when you've had a better night's sleep or when you've had a little bit of free time and a break. I used to always be like, hey, like I'm not an ideas machine. Like I can't just like come up with stuff on the fly. Like you need to give me a couple days, and I might not be sitting here at my desk when I come up with it either. I'm probably going to be going for a walk or doing something active, or I'm sitting down and watching TV and something sparks an idea. Like I think we just in America don't always have that balance very right, and we undervalue rest, recovery, kind of personal wellness, and we overvalue that kind of high productivity, go type of mentality, which again is another reason why I prefer California or LA over like in New York, because it's just a little bit less, like toned down a little more. New York is just like, you take 2 seconds too long to order your coffee at the coffee shop and the people behind you, hurry up, you should know what you want by the time you get to the cashier. And I'm like, geez, like relax. It's exhausting. So yeah, I think having time for your own hobbies and your personal passions is super important. And yeah, you got to find a job that allows you to do both.
And what I really relate to is like you mentioned, like you need space to create ideas, and I think that's one of the concepts in the book. That's why I mentioned the book. I think I got sidetracked. Is that wandering, like mind wandering, is one of the best ways to be creative and let your brain like process things and grow. It's like sleep. You process stuff that happened in the day, and mind wandering is when you're Like, that's why you always have ideas in the shower, because you're not distracted by your phone, someone talking to you, or notifications, or a screen, or something. You're not distracted. So there are few moments in our modern lives where we're not distracted. So just allowing yourself to have breathing space and not doing anything, literally anything, like just walking around without even music in your ears, is probably the best way to have creative ideas. But in a hustle culture, that's not really, they don't really approve of, like, oh, I'm just gonna go for a walk. What, in the middle of this,
Yeah.
like a walk? You know?
Yeah,
They
it's
don't, they
so
don't like that
true.
so much.
It's so true. I remember reading a study recently about the importance of being bored. And I think one thing I'm really grateful for my parents growing up is like we didn't have gaming consoles or like electronics for entertainment. And there were also periods of time where my parents would be like, go to your room. And I'm like, yeah, I have nothing to do. And they're like, entertain yourself, like figure it out. For my sister, she loved reading. That was her thing. I had like a whiteboard in my room. I'd set up my dolls. I'd pretend to, teach them or whatever class I was doing. Or, I came up with all sorts of games as a kid that I think I got comfortable with A, being alone, and B, just being bored. And I think as an adult, like the same still applies. Like you have to be able to entertain yourself. You have to be able to sit down and eat a meal without watching TV or listening to a podcast. Like just sit and eat. So many of us don't do that even, like, and think about how long you eat for. It's not very long. And so a lot of kids these days lose that because we're constantly stimulated by something, as you said. And I think not only does that, kind of impact your mental health, but it also impacts your performance in anything that you do, whether that's on the tennis court or in your work or in your relationships and your friendships. Is like, gotta have that like breathing room and that time to be bored. It doesn't have to be every day, but I try and purposely like leave afternoons or weekends unscheduled. No, I'm not gonna go hang out with friends. I just want to be with myself and see what I come up with. And that's always the times when I have the best outcomes, the best ideas, the best creative moments.
Yeah, and you feel really good. That's what I've noticed. Like if you get that breathing space and you just be, in your own, own air, whatever, you just usually feel really good because you feel very connected to yourself and probably the rest of the world in a way, because you're just not like completely overwhelmed with a lot of distractions or a lot of, chatter or stuff that's most people are. And when it comes to like social media, I mean, now you have a growing account and you're probably going to have a lot of interactions. Is that something you are, prepared for mentally, or are you learning as you go? What's your take on that? Or do you have a good post and go strategy, or are you a bit stuck on the phone?
Yeah, I mean, ever since I started doing stuff on Instagram, my screen time has definitely gone up a lot. But that's part and parcel of the game and trying to grow community. I try to keep things relevant to like what I'm doing. Like to me, if I'm engaging with other, content creators and accounts within the tennis realm, I look at that a little bit like work rather than just kind of like personal doom scrolling, which, don't get me wrong, happens to me too. But I try to be intentional about it at least. And I think, one just accepts that there are some strange people online, and people also feel entitled to say things that they would never say to your face. And it's a very strange phenomenon about the internet. I don't understand the psychology behind it personally. Like if I don't like something that I scroll past on Instagram, I never take the time to like leave a comment that's like, I hope you die, or your mom gets cancer and you die, dies a horrible death, or like I've never like, that has never come to mind. So it always takes me by surprise a little bit when you get those types of hateful comments. And like you look at their profile and it's somebody who's like a dad with kids, and you're like, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you spending time doing this? Like, what happened to you? Like, why are you feeling this way? Or like yesterday, I commented about how I'm well aware I'm not a professional player and that my strokes aren't 100% beautiful, and the number of messages I'll get from people who aren't even coaches telling me like how crap my serve is, or I need to do this or do that. And I'm just like, who gave you the right like to give a running commentary on what I'm doing? And I can't imagine what it's like for players that a pro level who get this type of hate as an outcome of, their matches and people betting on them and people telling them they're crap week in, week out. That's so hard to deal with at scale from a mental perspective. And so I'm very sympathetic to that, because one or two, nasty comments can leave you feeling kind of crappy for the rest of the day, or it's particularly memorable. And you're like, oh, I remember when someone, told me this online. Like, even if it didn't ruin your day, you're not going to forget it. And it's hard to completely block it out, too, because it's, at the end of the day, it's public and it's there and you're probably going to see it. So I think it's just trying to, as much as possible, like, just understand that it's trolls. It's people who have their own pain and different things going on, and try to remember, like, for all of the crappy things that go on, there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of love, and there's a lot of really awesome people. And so, the 10% of the time that it's crappy and you get, people coming after you, the rest of the time it's the positive side. So that's kind of what I just try to remind myself. And every once in a while I'll clap back and say my piece, but some of them are pretty funny too at the end of the day. So yeah, I think one just tries to be as positive as possible and surround yourself with people that, do like what you're doing and leave you positive feedback, and try and ignore the bullshit.
Yeah, you can always block, I guess. But I know there's so many armchair experts in tennis. Like, I mean, I talked to Karu, who's a pro player, and he even gets advice. Like, I've gotten loads of advice of having a shorter swing or doing this from players that are probably worse than me over the years. And if you're a coach, they don't send advice because usually they know a bit more. They understand a bit more about the game, and they realize it's not their place because you didn't pay them to get a coaching advice. But people love giving unsolicited advice. It's generally something I'm sometimes shocked. I'm like, all right, man, good luck on your life, buddy. But it's just a part of it, I guess. But it does sometimes take a bit of brain space in your head that you're like, because you can't, it's so far from your own experience as a human being that you can't understand the person. It's like, you're trying to, like, why, even if you're super angry and you're having the shittiest day, why leave a comment on a stranger's Instagram? How is that gonna make it better? Like, there's no way it's gonna make it better. It's like, I got that one, it's like this. So it's a funny concept. I think everybody just needs to deal with it. It's just what it is. But I think maybe, if people had to have, like, very, some verification, or just had to have, like, a personal thing, maybe it would be better, because people wouldn't tell you in an elevator, like, you need to improve your forehand, I saw your video. I don't think so.
Exactly right. I mean, it's coaches know, again, as you say, like, you're not paying me, so why should I, go out my way to tell you this and that. And I hate to make blanket statements, but more so than not, it is men who are telling me this too. And it's just like, I've literally never had a woman give me feedback on what I'm doing. I've had women be like, this is crap, but I've not had women be like, you need to do this and try to explain to me, like, what it is that I'm doing wrong. And so that to me is an interesting, like, psychology in itself. And I mean, like, the other day I'm playing at a local court, and this guy's like, oh, I just started learning tennis 2 years ago. And he's out there trying to, coach people who've played for 8, 9, 10 years or played for their whole life. I'm like, mate, just play your game. Like, people will like you so much more if you don't insert yourself into what they're doing. And it's just, nobody wants unsolicited advice, whether it's online or in person, unless, like, I'm playing with you and I'm like, hey, like, what do I need to do differently? I'm asking you a question, or we're a team or something. I'm not giving you any advice. Like, why? I'm not qualified to do so. And it's annoying more than anything. Like, nobody likes it, not just in sport, but in anything you do. So I think it's like, just some people need that humble reminder of, like, just keep your thoughts to yourself. Like, and if you're really that great of a coach, like, go ahead and get your qualification, and you can teach me in person. And if it makes that much of a difference, then I'll give you all the credit.
Yeah, even I think Felix said that he wanted to when I talk to him, he's like he gets, you know, advice. He's playing on the ATP tour. I mean, lower level, but still, like,
Mm-hmm.
any people write to him like how he should improve his life, his forehand, his whatever. And he just wants to like pay for their flights so they can fly and he can beat them 6-love,
Yeah.
6-love. But I'm not sure that would help, but that would be funny. At least it would be a funny content idea. You know, I would love to see that if like some hater has to fly somewhere and get spanked, it would just would be
Oh,
good.
it'd be great. Yeah, I think that was an interesting conversation around the U.S. Open this year with like Andy Roddick and Andrea Petkovic, where they were talking about there's some study where like more than 50% of Americans thought that they could get a game off of a professional player. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, half of you wouldn't even be able to get one ball back over the net. Like, do you understand the difference in topspin and trajectory and speed in which, you know, these players are playing? Like, it's a completely different ball game, amateur tennis and professional tennis. And, like, it blows my mind how easy people think it is. Like, it's one of the most difficult sports in the world, and I just can't for the life of me understand how that many people think that they could really get a game off of these professional players. Like, I would be excited to win 1 point in a set.
Yeah, and I mean, you should. I mean, I played against guys who are like 200 in the world, and you're afterwards, I leave feeling somewhat depressed, but also appreciative, you know? So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we are two different sports here, you know? And I'm playing like 5-6 times a week, you know? But it's like, I think it's just watching sports on TV makes people have this expert mindset. I don't know. It's like, seems to be like, I see the mistake this pitcher is doing, or this football player, whatever, and you're like, do you really seeing it?
Yeah, or people be like, oh, that's so easy, even I would have finished that. I'm like, yeah, sure. Like,
yeah, everybody wants to comment. It's like, oh, that was so bad. You know, I'm a better pole vaulter than this. You're like, what are you talking about?
I know, everyone's like, oh, that was the easiest overhead in the world. I'm like, mate, I am sure you have shanked more overheads than you've made in your life, so please, like, leave it be. You know, I think some people really don't appreciate the level at which these athletes compete, how good they are. You know, the different levels of the sport, as you say, it's a different ball game. Like, even, you know, from an amateur playing somebody who's played college level tennis, it's demoralizing and extremely humbling every time. Like, you know, it's like, it's one thing to be able to go out there and rally with somebody. It's like, yeah, that pro can take 25% off of their shot so they can keep a rally going with you. But as soon as you start a point, that ball's sailing past you, my friend. Like, you know, it's being able to understand that just because you might be able to hit back and forth with someone doesn't mean that you can beat them. It's a completely different scenario, and they're much more intelligent, and they have the strategy down and the knowledge down. I mean, it's just so arrogant to think that you know, you could beat somebody at that level.
I think one of the problems is the bird's eye view sometimes on the TV. I mean, it's not always bird's eye, but it's often bird's eye view where you get like this false sense of slowness to the game. Like, it takes 1, 2, 3 seconds for Djokovic to run to this side, and then you're like, do you know how much court he's covering in like seconds? You know, it's and if you get closer, where they sometimes, like very rarely, dip behind the players, and you see the spin and the pace and then you at least get an idea. But I think this, like, watching it from, I mean, some tournaments do it to extremes where the camera looks like it's a drone, you know. You're like, okay, I don't want to watch tennis from a drone. You know, you want to be closer to the action. Maybe not all the time, but I kind of prefer being as close as possible.
I completely agree. I think that's a very clever point. And I think when you do see the courtside angle and you're right behind the player, I think in particular, like the spin or the RPMs is what's like the most challenging thing to deal with for players, or to kind of understand that difference of like when you're getting a ball and it kicks up that fast and that high on you, and like that's something you don't, you know, you're not used to. It's almost impossible to like get it back over. I mean, you know, that feeling of like, oh my god, like that kicks, like I really need to adjust everything about my timing and the way that I'm playing. And so yeah, that kind of courtside angle when you're right behind the player definitely shows that a lot more, and also shows their anticipation and their ability to read the game. I think that's the other thing we don't appreciate. It's like not just their physical capability, but it's like they look at how another player's hips are lined up or shoulders are lined up and are able to, you know, guess with good percentages or probabilities. Oh, that ball's going down the line, or that's going cross court, that's coming as a slice, and being able to anticipate that and make the next, have the next shot already planned out before they've hit that one. Like, that is a completely different skill set. It's a different intelligence, and something that we don't, appreciate or see on the TV until you're really playing tennis, and you're like, okay, like I understand why at the highest level this game is so freaking difficult.
Do you have any plans for 2024 to go to any tournaments live? Maybe you did a few this year, but like, do you have like BNP Paribas, Indian Wells? What's your schedule like?
Yes, I'm definitely going to go to Indian Wells. I'm also hoping to go to San Diego. I know they moved that tournament to be just before Indian Wells this year, so I'm really stoked about that because I missed it in September. And I'm hoping I'll definitely go to the US Open again. I'm hoping maybe Wimbledon will be on the cards. I applied for the ballot, keeping my fingers crossed. And yeah, I think we'll see where my hopes and dreams go with commentary and what I'm able to do. But if I can get my name on a couple press passes here and there, that would certainly make going to the tournaments a little bit more affordable, and hopefully widen my reach of meeting folks at the tournaments and being able to share fun content around it, and hopefully inspire some more people to get some tickets and turn up.
Yeah, and it's not that impossible to get press pass. Some tournaments are very old-fashioned and stuff, but they generally is being a bit more social media friendly. It's a slow transition, but it seems like it's happening. That's what I've noticed, at least. I will see. Yeah. I'm planning also to go to Indian Wells, and then Wimbledon would be cool. I've been there before, but it's a fantastic tournament, of course, so it would be nice. And you need to plan ahead, because like if you are like 4 months before a tournament, it's sometimes not enough. So you need to be like applying really early. But
it's true.
It's a good way to integrate a bit with the players and also get some interviewing opportunities, and also like tennis should be watched live. I know it's a cost thing for most people, but it's like it's so much better live than it's on TV.
Yeah, and I think what I've realized recently is like I've brought friends with me who aren't big tennis people. I'm like, oh, just come with me. Like, I know tennis well. I'll explain everything to you. It'll be a fun day. And the number of times they're like, oh my gosh, I had so much fun. I had no idea tennis was like this. I'm definitely going to be coming back. It's really awesome to see that, because it's not just about the tennis itself, but a lot of these tournaments put on a really great event and a really great show, and there's different activations and things to do. And of course, Indian Wells is such a beautiful venue. It's hard not to like it in itself. So I try when I go to these types of tournaments to bring people along who maybe aren't the biggest tennis heads, and a lot of the time they leave feeling like, oh, this is definitely something I would come back for. And that to me shows again that like tennis as a sport and a product is really great. It's just the exposure and the reach of widening, the community beyond just your tennis diehard fans to include folks who are just sports fans, would really benefit the sport in the long run.
What a great point to end this conversation on. Do you have a TikTok account? I was going to ask, because it's Eliza's World Instagram. That's going to be in the description, of course. But do you do TikTok as well?
I do. My TikTok has been a little bit dormant over the last couple months, just 'cause it's hard to keep up with both. But I'm on TikTok. It's Eliza's World, so same handle. And yes, my goal is to get started back on TikTok. I've found it's much easier to build community on Instagram, and TikTok can be it's easier to go viral, but there are some strange people on TikTok. So if you really want to connect with me and chat, Instagram's the place, but you can also find me on TikTok as well.
Yeah, I find TikTok to be impossible to understand. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm like, because it seems like if you use the right song, the correct filter that's in at the moment, like you just need to follow a trend, jump on it, and have some good timing. I think that's it. Yeah. But like building that thing, which Tennis Nerd is a lot about like people sharing a passion for tennis and connecting in a community, and the website and the Instagram and the YouTube and so on. But on TikTok, it seems like you can't do that at all, It's completely different,
I don't have the same interactions with the same people, day in, day out that I do on Instagram. On TikTok, like, yes, I've had a couple random videos that, can go a little viral, get a good number of views, but they don't stay, or it's not the same connection I'm able to build on Instagram. So To me, Instagram's still the easier product to navigate, and also the one that allows me to connect most with other like-minded people.
It was great connecting with you, Eliza. I wish you all the best. I hope we can meet in person, maybe in India once or something.
Yeah,
Talk more tennis.
absolutely.
I'm sure people listening to this will subscribe and follow you and you're on your
Thank
journey. We hope to see you in the commentating booth at the US Open very soon. Keep
Thank
pushing.
you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure, and hope to see you at Indian Wells.
Cool.